Kevin Costner turned 70 with more unfinished business than most men accumulate in a lifetime, and somewhere between the collapse of his Yellowstone empire and the grueling production of Horizon, he reportedly started having a very specific kind of conversation with the people closest to him. Not about what he wants his legacy to look like, about who he doesn't want standing over his casket when the time comes. That distinction cuts to the bone of what Kevin Costner is actually like as a human being away from the cameras. And the names that have reportedly surfaced in those private conversations reveal something that 4 decades of blockbusters and award speeches never quite managed to. Exactly who betrayed him, who humiliated him, and who he has quietly, permanently never forgiven. Those who have spent real time around Costner describe a man operating with an almost old-fashioned moral code, one where respect is earned slowly, loyalty is non-negotiable, and a betrayal, once committed, gets filed away forever, even when the surface remains polite. He doesn't blow up publicly, doesn't chase feuds through the press, and doesn't fire off statements. What he does is remember, with the quiet patience of someone who understands that a person's character eventually reveals itself without any help. The names on his reported no-welcome list are not random. Each one connects to a wound with a specific origin, a specific moment where something broke that never quite healed back together correctly. And the first name connects to one of the most widely documented moments of celebrity humiliation from the entire decade of the 90s. During those early years, Costner occupied a position of genuine Hollywood dominance, fresh off the Oscar triumph of Dances with Wolves and riding the staggering commercial momentum of The Bodyguard, which produced the best-selling movie soundtrack in recorded history. Madonna was simultaneously at her own cultural peak, having launched the Blonde Ambition tour and allowed cameras to follow her through it for the documentary Truth or Dare. What should have been an unremarkable backstage interaction between two entertainers became, because of what happened after Costner left the room, one of pop culture's most enduring examples of private mockery going permanently public. Costner had attended her concert and brought his children backstage afterward, operating entirely in good faith, wanting to offer genuine support and give his kids a memorable experience. He told her the show was neat, and then he left. The moment his back turned, Madonna looked directly into the documentary camera and gagged, wordlessly reducing his sincerity to a punchline that millions of people would eventually watch. The specific cruelty wasn't simply the mockery itself, but the context surrounding it. A man who had arrived with his children in complete openness, being used as material the second he stepped away. People who know Costner point to this as the kind of thing he finds genuinely unforgivable, not because his ego was bruised, but because his sincerity was weaponized. He reportedly told friends more than once that he wouldn't want anyone at his funeral who would mock him behind his back, and Madonna's name came up specifically in that context. The second name represents a completely different category of tension, built not around a single incident, but around decades of two enormously self-assured personalities occupying the same industry without ever finding common ground. Kevin Costner and Sean Penn have never worked together, rarely appeared at the same events, and by multiple industry accounts have maintained a deliberate mutual avoidance that goes well beyond scheduling coincidence. The surface similarities between the two men are real enough: serious actors with directing ambitions, political convictions, and reputations for refusing to compromise their artistic vision. None of that created kinship. If anything, it generated exactly the kind of friction that emerges when two people who see themselves similarly refused to acknowledge the resemblance. Their approaches to public life further underscored the divide. Penn's activism has always been confrontational and theatrical, involving direct personal appearances in international conflict zones. Costner's engagement with causes runs quieter, more traditionally rooted in American landscapes and environmental concerns. Over time, the relationship hardened into something close to mutual contempt, maintained at a careful distance, and Costner has allegedly characterized Penn as exactly the kind of person who might attend a funeral not out of genuine grief, but to be seen grieving, which in Costner's value system qualifies as about the worst thing a person can do. Yet the third situation carries the most emotional weight, and not because it involves straightforward conflict. It involves the legacy of Whitney Houston, someone Costner has spoken about publicly with what appears to be completely genuine grief. The Bodyguard, released in 1992, became one of the defining cultural events of that decade, driven by the electricity between its two leads and Houston's historic soundtrack performance. When she died in February of 2012, Costner delivered a eulogy at her funeral that remains one of the most moving tributes one entertainment figure has ever paid another, speaking about her talent, her vulnerability, and the bond they formed making that film together. The admiration and the grief were both real. What unfolded in the years following her death is where the story turns complicated. Costner had long been developing a sequel to The Bodyguard, believing he was honoring what the two of them had created together. The process of engaging with the representatives managing her estate reportedly became increasingly adversarial, with legal and financial considerations crowding out the creative and personal ones. From Costner's perspective, the people now speaking for Houston were questioning motivations he considered completely honorable, transforming a genuine artistic partnership into a battleground of contracts and control. He has reportedly said the idea of those same representatives attending his own funeral strikes him as an almost unbearable irony. The fourth name takes the conversation to the production of Open Range, which Costner directed, produced, and starred in back in 2003, a slow and carefully constructed Western that stands as one of his most accomplished pieces of work as a filmmaker. Alongside him stood Robert Duvall, whose reputation as one of the country's finest actors is essentially beyond dispute. On screen, the pairing produced exactly what it should have. Behind the cameras, according to people who were present, the experience generated a sustained friction that neither man found comfortable. The conflict was fundamentally creative. Costner came to that set with a precise and fully formed vision, and directing is by definition an exercise in having your vision respected. Duvall arrived with his own decades of experience and strong opinions about how certain scenes should be approached. When those two visions didn't align, the tension was described by crew members as a Cold War rather than open conflict, sustained and palpable, but maintained beneath a professional surface. What made it particularly difficult for Costner was the depth of his prior admiration for Duvall, the kind of admiration that creates specific expectations and specific disappointments when reality proves more complicated. He has reportedly said he wouldn't want anyone at his funeral who hadn't respected him enough to trust his direction, and Duvall's name has come up in that context with a resignation that suggests the disappointment settled in permanently. The fifth name carries none of the historical distance of the others. The wound is recent, the details are widely known, and the bitterness reportedly has not softened. Yellowstone launched on the Paramount Network in 2018 and grew into a cultural force with viewership numbers that hadn't been seen in basic cable for years, repositioning Costner as the anchor of the most-watched drama in America and introducing him to an entirely new generation of fans. Sheridan created that opportunity, and for several seasons the collaboration produced something genuinely special. The deterioration was driven by a collision of priorities that probably couldn't have been resolved even with perfect communication. Costner had committed to Horizon, a multi-part Western film epic he had been carrying forward for decades, the kind of personal artistic vision a filmmaker simply cannot abandon without abandoning something essential about himself. Sheridan was simultaneously expanding Yellowstone into an entire interconnected universe of programming that required Costner's sustained availability. Something was always going to give, and what gave was the relationship itself. The rupture became public through leaks from both camps that generated competing narratives in the entertainment press, and the version that gained traction painted Costner as difficult and ungrateful. From where Costner stood, the characterization felt like a betrayal of the good faith he had brought to the partnership. He has reportedly named Sheridan specifically when discussing people he wouldn't want at his funeral, describing the public narrative as a distortion of his actual motivations. The sixth and final name is, in its own way, the strangest of all, because it describes a relationship built almost entirely out of absence. Kevin Costner and Julia Roberts emerged from the same generation of Hollywood stardom, both breaking through in the late 80s and spending the 90s as two of the most reliably bankable names in the industry. They have never collaborated, and the persistent failure of their potential projects across different studios in different years has been noted often enough to make coincidence an unsatisfying explanation. Multiple projects reportedly moved through early development with both names attached, and each time the collaboration collapsed without any public explanation. Theories circulate freely among industry observers, ranging from compensation disagreements to clashing creative priorities to a personal interaction that left a lasting negative impression. Neither camp has ever confirmed any of them. Costner's private characterization frames it as accumulated rejection, a pattern of declined collaboration that reads, from his side, as a statement about how she valued the possibility of working with him. He has reportedly said that if she didn't want to make a film with him while he was alive, he sees no reason for her to be at his funeral making gestures toward a closeness that simply never existed. Every name on this list connects back to the same underlying principle. Madonna used sincerity as raw material for mockery. Penn, in Costner's view, performs emotion rather than feeling it. Houston's estate representatives turned genuine creative partnership into legal adversarialism. Duvall refused to extend the basic professional trust that directing requires. Then Sheridan allowed a mutually valuable relationship to be characterized publicly in ways that distorted the truth. Roberts declined, repeatedly and without explanation, what Costner apparently experienced as a genuine offer of collaboration. In every case, the offense isn't the conflict itself. The offense is the inauthenticity running underneath it. People who have worked closely with Costner describe someone who feels things more deeply than his public image suggests, a man whose on-screen steadiness is real, but whose sensitivity to betrayal runs equally deep beneath it. His thoughts about who shouldn't attend his funeral aren't the product of an old man cataloging resentments. They reflect a man who has spent 70 years building a life around a specific set of values, who has watched those values violated in specific ways by specific people, and who wants the final gathering of his life to mean something real, rather than serve as one last performance for an industry that has always been more comfortable with performance than truth.